Anyways, welcome to our Rochester Baseball Historical Society and Luke Easter SABR chapter meeting tonight from Tales from the Dugout, in which we're joined by two former Red Wing bat boys. And of course, the bat boy is a position that's not existing this year in the time of COVID. So hopefully that'll be back in the future, but looking forward to hearing the tales from you gentlemen's time with the Wings. Thanks to Joe Torito for organizing this session and getting our guests all aligned. And I'm going to turn it over to Scott Pitoniak, our renowned MC and current writer for the Rochester Business Journal, amongst numerous other outlets. And he'll be starting the program by leading a discussion with Dave and Max. And then at the end, he'll open it up for questions. If you have any questions that you're thinking of that you don't want to forget, feel free to put them in the chat box. And any questions you want to ask live, we'll open it up at the end. If you are not Max, Scott, or Dave, I will probably mute your microphone if you can. If I haven't, just so that we don't get feedback and background noise. And with that, we'll turn it over to Scott.
Thanks, Doc. I really appreciate this, and thanks everybody for showing up. I'm looking forward to this. I know both of these gentlemen, and I use that term very lightly with these two guys. Just joking. Okay. But anyway, I've always been intrigued by bat boys because I think that they're kind of they can give us really the behind the scenes view of really what goes on with a ball club. So I'm really looking forward to this with both Max Robertson and with Dave Parlet. Max Robertson's a longtime friend. We played 19th century baseball together. And he was a bat boy of the Red Wings back in 1966, which also happened to be the debut of Earl Weaver. We're going to talk, I'm sure, a lot about Earl this evening. And Dave Parlet, known him for a long, long time as well. And Dave was 1973, which is also significant because he was right in the middle of the Joe Altobelli era of all those great teams and so forth. Although that particular year they didn't win a Governor's Cup, but they were still extremely competitive and stocked with a lot of Orioles talent back then. I'd like to start out. We're going to go, Max, you first. Age before beauty. How did you become a bat boy? This was there was a contest, wasn't there, that involved the newspaper in order for you to become a bat boy? Tell us how that all came about.
Yeah, yeah, you had to write an essay, and I did. I wrote the essay. My dad was a editor a proofreader at the Democrat and Chronicle and the Times Union. So my half-hour essay turned into about 4 hours. He kept correcting it. He says, "I don't think you need that. I think you might need this." Anyways, long story short, I was one of the 10 finalists from the essay that I wrote. And what I wrote in the essay was basically a friend. We used to hang out at the ballpark because I didn't live very far from there in Irondequoit. And Andy Garcia was a friend who was the visiting bat boy. And we would come all the time for batting practice and shag balls. And so one day Andy says, "Listen, will you fill in for me tomorrow night? You know, just get here, you know, the game's at 7, so get here around 5, get the bats out, the ball so on." So I got there about maybe 12 or 1, and I got the uniform on, and the other team came, Richmond I think it was, came in around 4, and around 5 it started to cloud up, and about 6:30 it poured. It just poured, and they called it off at 5 minutes to 7. They said no game. So that's as close as I got to being a bad boy, and that's what my essay was kind of about, and what my speech at the Sheraton was about. And it came down to 2 guys, me and a guy named Dick Keegan. And it's funny, I just came across the 1963 Red Wings team picture. I don't know if you can see this thing, but in this is his, I'm sorry, 59. And that was his Uncle Bob. His Uncle Bob Keegan pitched a no-hitter for the Red Wings. So it's me and Dick, and they're going to pick a visiting bat boy and a regular bat boy, the home team bat boy. So when they announced, they said, okay, the 1966 visiting bat boy will be, I stood up, and they said Dick Keegan. So, yeah, so Dick was the visiting, and I was the bat boy for the year.
Very good.
That was cool.
Did you also have to go through an
Yeah.
essay process as well?
Not an essay. It was a questionnaire that came out of the Democrat Chronicle paper. I assume the Times Union as well. It was just a simple question, little things. I was about one of 12 that got picked to come down as a finalist. It was at the Downtowner, I guess, hotel and motel, whatever it was. It was the first time I had ever been there, but it's supposed to have been a famous place, I guess. Went down there. It was early April. Went through the process of being interviewed. There was about 5 or so people on the question table. Bruno Snyders was one of them. Mrs. Altobelli was on it. I believe that may have been the assistant GM, Ed Barnowski. And I'm thinking that it might have been the broom girl from the 71. She was on it. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, they would ask questions. The typical one is, why would you want to be the bat boy? My goal in life at the time was to be I wanted to be a sports trainer. And I specifically specialize in kinesiology and what have you. And they thought, well, that's interesting. I never heard that one before. How would being a bat boy help you with that? And I says, well, being around the trainer, being around the locker room, watching, how things unfold. These guys are going to get hurt at some point, and that would be one of the reasons, and they says, well, okay. And then they just asked regular questions on who was, say, on the Red Wing team the previous year. They asked who was the MVP in the World Series, who was going to be, now that Clemente had passed, who was rumored to be the right fielder. And of course, it would have been Sanguian. Who was the MVP in the World Series, tennis, little things. But one of the most intriguing questions at the time, I wouldn't think of it at the time, but now would be, if you were ever asked by a Black player to do anything, go pick something up for him, or just do something that he ordered you or asked you to do, would you do it? And of course, you just say yes. Of course, why would that be? But again, it was the times. It was something a little different. And now looking at it, you think, where are you going with that? But it was a question, and it was that was probably the most on the spot question. But it came down to me and another boy, and I was chosen then, fortunately, to be the Red Wing bat boy.
And how old were you at the time?
16.
16. And Max, how old were you?
Same.
16. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
Max, what was the remuneration? How much were you getting paid?
That's funny. I don't remember getting a paycheck. I may have gotten paid. I don't know. Dave, did you get paid?
I got paid. I don't know, it was always different. I got a check for like $3 and something cents.
That's about right.
Yeah.
I do remember one thing. They won the pennant.
Okay.
The 66 team did international league pennant. And the regular players, the Epsteins and the Demeters and the Barnowskis and Bertanias, all those guys, Weaver, they all made $400 full share. The players voted me a quarter share.
Wow.
They gave me a check for $100.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's beautiful.
I wonder, Max, because I know you played high school baseball and you went on to play college baseball as well. Like, I mean, didn't you forfeit your amateur stand? We're gonna have to talk to the NCAA about this, I think, or whatever. So, okay, we'll be quiet. All right, I want to know from you guys, like, so tell us, what are the basic responsibilities of a bat boy? Tell us what a typical day in the life of a bat boy was back in 1966 and 1973.
All
Hey,
right,
go ahead.
me, okay, I would have to get there about 3:30. Some days, you know, I would be asked by the players, you know, can you come in earlier? They like me. I was like their little brother, so to speak. I was fortunate enough that I could play the game pretty decent. So I threw a lot of batting practice, awful lot, live batting practice to those guys. So, but typically I would come in at 3:30 for I think it would be a 7:35 start or something. And my only really responsibility was just make sure that the pine tar rag was well tarred. The rosin bag was behind the mound. Get the catcher's equipment out by the circle. Get the batting helmets out. Get the players brought their own bats to the game. I brought them back into the clubhouse. And that towels were out there, and that was pretty much it. And then it was just being a kid and playing ball right up until the minute the first pitch was thrown, because I would be playing catch in the outfield, warming up, playing pepper, doing everything. In fact, when a game started, it kind of broke up my night. You know, it was like, geez, why? You know, so but that was it. It's totally different now for a bat boy than it was when I was there.
Yeah.
That's what was it like in 66? What were your responsibilities?
Well, that was a strange summer. Now that I look back on it, when in April when I started, I was still like 5'4", 5'5", and by the end of the summer, I was 6'1". I grew 9 inches that summer, and I got bigger than some of the players, Tommy Phoebus, Freddie Bean, and Frank Britannia. I was looking down at them at the end of the season. Pretty much what Dave said, you know, getting all the equipment out. We used to get there pretty early because I only lived maybe 10 minutes bike ride from the ballpark on Norton Street, and so we'd get there 1:30, 2 o'clock, and we had a bunch. It was like Bad News Bears. We had a bunch of kids. In fact, Herman Schneider was there every day. And he was the biggest guy. He was the last one picked for when we used to divide up teams. Herman Schneider ended up being the trainer for the Yankees and for probably the last 30 years of his career for the White Sox. And but that aside, just like Dave said, we'd get the stuff out, make sure everything is out, and then we had to rub the balls up. Usually the umpires did it, but once in a while they had us. We got this Mississippi mud or something. I don't know if they had that for you, Dave.
Chesapeake or something. It came from.
Yeah, a special mud.
Yeah, special mud.
Take these beautiful white balls and rub the mud over them. You know.
Yeah.
And we used to have to get maybe 3 dozen balls ready for a game.
And we should point out, it's not like today that anytime there's a little speck on the ball, it's out.
No.
I mean, they kept those balls in play.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if Dave remembers, but at Red Wing Stadium, was it Silver Stadium when you worked there? Or
Silver.
Red Wing?
Silver Stadium.
Okay, yeah, I think 68. They
68. Yep.
The backstop had a slope to it, so when it came down, there was a dip right at the bottom.
Yeah.
And the first thing I was told by I think it was Carl Seinfeld. Was he the general manager?
He was GM. Not with you, I don't think. No.
I'm trying to think who the guy was. It was something like that.
Yeah.
He didn't like me much, but I'll tell you why later. But the very first thing he said to me was, "Bat boy, that ball goes back on the backstop and it comes down. It's going to hang up at the bottom, and I want you out there to pick up that ball. Climb up there, get it, bring it down, and give it to the umpire." So, he said, "Don't you dare leave that ball sitting there." So Scott knows the story, but I'll make it quick. It was opening day. It was probably, I don't know, fourth inning. Our lineup went something like, I know Demeter hit third and Epstein hit fourth. So Demeter's up, Epstein's on deck, and we used to, you and I would be on a towel. We have a towel that we can kneel on behind the back on deck circle. And so the Demeter fouls went on the screen. So I tear off to get that ball just as Epstein's coming around with two bats. And Epstein was probably 6'4", 240, solid muscle. And I saw those bats, and at the last second, I just ducked. The bats went over my head. I ran to the screen, climbed up, got the ball, brought it over to Augie Guglielmo at home plate. And I came back to go back to my position behind the on-deck circle, and Epstein grabs me by the shirt as I went by, and he says, "Don't you ever do that again."
Yeah. Yeah.
He could have killed me.
Now,
So
now we have to add on to this, Max, the story like when Mike Epstein, when we were inducting him into the Wings Hall of Fame several years ago, you had told me that story. So I had brought a baseball, and I told him the story. He goes, "Oh yeah, I remember that." And he wrote a ball for you, right? And did he write on it, Doc, Max, Duck? Yeah. So
yeah, I should have brought it out. I can go get it. It says Max, Duck, Mike.
now you guys, you both played for two iconic Wings managers here in obviously Earl Weaver and Joe Altobelli, and we could spend the entire hour here talking just about those two. But let's try to focus in on now. Earl was an irascible sort, Max, and there's a funny story. I remember you telling us about your mom had altered your bat boy uniform, and Earl wasn't real pleased about that. So give us a little feel about Earl Weaver and kind of the control he had over everything, including bat boys.
I could go on forever. Opening day, it was during the day, and my dad worked nights, so he couldn't come to the game. Anyways, Earl and I sat at one end of the dugout, and the rest of the players sat at the other end. And my uniform, I was pretty small back then, but my uniform was a 38 waist and an extra large jersey, and I was just kind of swimming in it. When I ran, I had to hold on to the belt because it was going to fall down. And back then in '66, that was the age of showing as much sanitary sock as possible. We used to call the other socks the Chicago Cub socks, the little, So that I managed to keep the uniform on, but I sat next to Earl, and I know this is a family show, so I won't repeat exactly what he said. But the next day, my dad came home from work, and he goes, "Tell me all about it. What was Earl?" He called him Bucky Weaver. "What was Bucky like?" And I said, "Oh, he argued a lot." And he said, "What do you say? What do you say?" I said, "Geez, Dad, I can't remember. But I can tell you that after any pitch that went against us, or any hit that went against us, any call that went against the Red Wings, he would say, 'Jesus effing Christ, all effing mighty,' after every single one." I must have heard it probably 30 times, but I couldn't tell my dad that because we don't swear. But I always remember that about Earl. So I took the uniform home that night, and my mom was a real good seamstress, and she measured it. She took it all in, and when I came back the next night, boy, that thing fit me like a glove. And she put elastic in the socks. I could pull them way up, and so I'm ready to. I show up in my uniform, and the players are looking at me like, "Where did you get this beautiful uniform?" And I told them, I said, "My mom took it in." so whoever the GM was, I thought it was Seinfeld, but whoever it was, he calls the dugout and Weaver answers the phone and he goes, "Who?" He goes, "Bat boy, it's for you." And he handed me the phone and he was up in the press box and he said, "Where'd you get that uniform?" I said, "It's the one that they gave me." "No, it isn't." And so I said, "Well, it was kind of big, so my mom kind of took it in." "Well, you tell her to take it out," one of these. So anyways, the long story short, she didn't. And Britannia, oh my gosh, Mickey McGuire, Ray Youngdahl, Cammy Carrion, I'm trying to think of all the guys, Epstein, all of them had her take their uniform.
Wow. Wow.
Steve Demeter, no, he liked it nice and baggy.
Yeah. Wow.
Dave, you got to work for a guy who was a polar opposite personality-wise of Earl, Joe Altobelli. Whole different approach he took.
Yeah.
With this again, a totally different personality
Totally.
than Earl. Tell us a little bit about Joe. What struck you about him, because he seemed to always be such an even keel perspective type guy.
Yeah, very much so. He never said a whole lot, he was always regarded, I guess, as a player's manager. There was only 2, maybe 3 closed door meetings, like at the end of the game where, I'd be running in carrying the bats or whatever. And the trainer, would say, "Hey, you got to stay out here." Or the clubby at the time would say, "Hey, you got to stay out. They're having a closed door meeting, player coaches meeting only." But never really saw him lose his cool with any one player at any particular time, except maybe once. And that involved me. And what ended up happening is we had a couple players on the team who, after an out, showed little league kind of behavior, throwing her helmet, acting like a little bit of, immature, grossly immature, so to speak. And they would throw a helmet down to the right field line, and I'd have to go run down and get it. And that was kind of embarrassing in a sense that, you're kind of, what are you? It didn't feel right. So anyway, you go and you get the helmet. This would happen every so often. And then you'd have a player or two, more of this one. I'll say it, it's Doug DeCinces. He's out and he comes in back into the dugout. And where the dugout and how it was situated, it was an old pour of concrete. So you had one end by the drinking fountain. It never seemed to go off. It always leaked. Then there was a nice puddle there, even in the driest month. And then the batting helmet rack next to the outdoor bat rack. And DeCinces came in, he was upset with something, and he throws the helmet down and it right into that puddle, and it goes all over everybody. And of course the helmet ricochets and goes all over and hits somebody. So I pick it up and I'm cleaning up, and Joe was sitting, he just came in from the end of the inning from third base, and he runs down and says, "David, stop it." Of course, there was, like Max said, we got a family show here. Stops it, and he says, let it lay there. And then Joe picked it up and threw it right back into it, and it went all over the place and it cracked. And he said to orders to both me and Jim Nipper, who was the clubhouse guy, "No fix, tape it." And so if you look at some of the helmets in 73, and there are a few photos, DNC photos, Times Union photos, you'll see a tape mark over by the ear or on the side, or you'll see a chip or a crack. And that was the only time I ever saw Joe lose it. And he says, "You will never pick up another piece of equipment from these guys again when they behave in such a way." And, he told them, "You're going to grow up. You're going to act a little more, because there was a time," and then I'll say another one who was a very good friend of mine, Tom Chopay, because I broke in all his equipment, cleats and gloves, everything. We were the same size for the most part. And he would get upset after a ground out or a fly out or whatever. And, I guess I got on top of him a little bit too quick to take his equipment back, and he would throw it down, or he'd throw it. And I go, "Oh." And then I'd have a look, like, geez, now I got to go all the way out the right field, down the line or against the fence and bring this thing back and, clean it up a little bit because it picked up every piece of stone and mud or whatever that was around. And, so Joe and the players, they saw that and they fixed it up a little bit.
Now speaking of childish behavior, or Earl Weaver obviously was famous, Max, for getting thrown out of games. I think he still holds the record. I have to go back and see how many times in 2 years he was thrown out. Give us a good story about Earl losing it, with an umpire. Any particular game or whatever where he really put on a show for everybody.
Oh yeah, many times. If you rolled them all into one, it usually involved his favorite umpire, which was Augie Guglielmo. And Augie was the only guy that was shorter than Earl. And Earl used to beak him with his hat. He'd beak him in the forehead. Then he'd turn the hat on backwards and get in close. He'd go out there and then he'd come back and then he'd go back out because he was just putting on a show. And a couple of times I remember him picking up first base and bringing it back in. And he would throw it into the dugout. And then, of course, he got tossed. So he went through the tunnel to the clubhouse. And a couple of times I had to go get the base and bring it back out. But one time he took it with him all the way to his, his office. And so it came out. I said, there's no base. They had to go down and get another one. Yeah.
There's a great story. I know when I was covering the New York Penn League, we were down in Elmira. And Elmira used to be the AA affiliate of the Orioles back in the old Eastern League. And there's a great story where he did take it out. And we should tell people, like, back then, you had the stakes in the ground with the straps with the bases. It wasn't like today where you just put the center post in there. And so he had yanked it out over a bad call that he disagreed with Elmira. He took it, went down the dugout, shut the door. Well, it just so happened this was, Elmira, they had one set of bases. And so they sent, the poor clubby had to go down there and knock on the door. And he's using a lot of his colorful words and this and that. And they just said, Mr. Weaver, if you don't give me the base back, the umpire said, you guys will forfeit the game. So he reluctantly threw it at the clubby, and the clubby had to go take it back and so forth. There's classics with him that season. Dave, did Joe ever blow his stack and get thrown out of the game?
He had seldom though, and I could still see it. I don't know the circumstance. He would do it when he felt that needed to either fire up the team or to, he felt maybe an umpire was baiting a player, and so he would go in there and defend him. But for the most part, no, he was a pretty cool guy and demanded that out of the team. He didn't really want anybody to misbehave in such a way that it was unbecoming of the organization. I ended up getting Ray Miller, who just passed away this past week. He was like my father there. He made sure everything was square. Everything was, when I first met him, he says, if there's anything you need or you think you need, or you've got a question, ask me. Well, I never had to. He always asked me if I was squared away. So what he ended up doing is he gave me an Oriole book, and I still have that. And it was the Oriole way. It was everything on how they were everything from how you behaved, what you ate. I mean, everything. As soon as you got to the ballpark, man, how to stretch, how to run, how to throw, how to behave, how to hit, how to catch, how to throw, all the plays, everything. And that was part of the Oriole way. You don't need to, get into it with the umpire, make it up. Another player will pick up whatever you've got anyway. If it comes down to one, and it says, if it comes down to one out, that play isn't going to be it. We'll make up for it as the game goes on.
Dave and Max, let's start with Dave first here. Like, one of the parallels I see with the two teams that you were working with, where both teams had these big sluggers who wound up being MVPs of the league. Max had alluded to Mike Epstein, and we'll let him talk a little bit more about Mike after. But Jim Fuller, 1973.
Yeah.
Jim Fuller was, they weren't on TV then, but he would be what you consider must-see TV. He would be perfect for today's game, all or nothing.
Oh, no.
He hits 39 homers, strikes out 197 times, which is still the franchise record. But he hit him over the light towers. Tell us about Jim Fuller and watching him play that summer.
He was iconic, and he was you know, you see a guy like that, and you know, he looked like Paul Bunyan. You know, he hit it. His bat was a monster. But he hit a ball that they said it went if behind the old off the Red Wing or Silver Stadium complex there was Bastion Street. It ran between Seneca and Clinton is it, I guess. He hit a ball that they said went over all of that and went down to Bastion, hit the fence, and then ricocheted and went down towards Seneca. And it rolled all the way down there. So they go, do you add feet onto that? When do you call it? But there was a time where in BP, he hit, if you remember the old scoreboard, it used to have P and then a C for pitcher and catcher next to the teams that day. Well, there was an I-beam right in between the P and the C, and he hit that. And, you know, I mean, that thing was a blast and a half. And when it came down, I retrieved the ball, and it had a flat spot on the ball. So you know, it was like, holy geez, this guy was, you know, everything and anything. But he was a prince of a guy. He was a quiet guy. Strikeouts and things bothered him. It bothered him immensely. There was a game that I took a road trip with the team to Pawtucket, and he faced Dick Pole. Dick Pole struck him out. It was an extra inning game. It struck him out 5 times in that game. And if the old McCoy Stadium, which was really it was like a gladiator place, was a dungeon. It was awful the way it was built. That you would go underneath the stands for the dugouts, and there was dirt, and you sat on a stool. It was awful. And there wasn't a light left. Okay, a light bulb left, Jim. You know, and then there were some people the following night. This is how everybody stood for Jim Fuller. You know, they fell for him because he was a genuine guy. He you know, he wasn't, you know, just because he hit a home run, he almost felt embarrassed. And he struck out, and then you played in McCoy Stadium, and there's maybe 200 people there. And Pete Brown at the time was the announcer for the Red Wings. And there was one guy in particular who just kept belittling him, and Fuller, you're this, you're that. And so they had to lower the volume, I guess, so they couldn't hear it back here on the radio back in Rochester. So Ray Miller says, Dave, I want you to, this is something else. I want you to go up there with Jim, who is the assistant clubhouse boy. And we want you to, here's $5, go buy some beer and go and take care of this fan. So this guy was sitting all the way up at the top, and we go up there, and I get out of my uniform. I get in there, I go, Jim comes in, we get to buy the beer, and we run into this guy. We're up there on the top. The guy's right at the tippy top, not too far from where Pete Brown. They used to have like a catbird type of where the game was called. And so what ends up happening is this guy's yelling, and we played like we were, and we dumped the beer on this guy. And all the players on the field, everybody knew this was happening because Ray told them, and everybody stopped and was watching. And when this came out, you could hear it on the radio. And Pete Brown, he's there, everybody, what's going on with all the yelling? Is this guy's, because we're running right by, and this guy's chasing us and yelling at us, saying, what, you know, calling us all these whatever. And then he didn't know who we were. And then we ran back out on the field, and we're down on the field. And then the guy sees who we're with. And then that was the end of that. But Jim Palmer was an iconic player and a great guy. He played here about 4 or 5 years, and unfortunately just could not handle the curveball.
You had mentioned, you alluded to Mike Epstein, who the media started calling Super Jew. He was Jewish, and he loved it. He had things embroidered with it, you know, T-shirts and stuff like that. But he was not only the IL MVP, he was the minor league player of the year. Big, strong guy. In fact, good piece of trivia. He played fullback at the University of California in addition to playing baseball. And his coach just happened to be
Right.
Marv Levy. Marv Levy was his coach in football out of Cal. But tell us a little bit about him and his strength and so forth that season.
Mike and I became good friends. He was just a few years older than I was at the time. And Sports Illustrated came in and they did a story on him, and they set up the cameras and the lights and everything in the clubhouse. And they called him Super Jew in the story. And he absolutely loved that. He was our home run. I can remember he had 26 home runs. He batted .309, he had 102 RBIs. And like you said, minor league player of the year. And I just thought he was going to be the next Babe Ruth. But of course, Washington, they got traded to Oakland and all that other stuff. But we had a couple of other guys that used to hang around the clubhouse. One was on one side of my locker and one was on the other side. And they're pretty well known. The guy that Dave's been talking about, Joe Altobelli. Joe was there. Basically, he was a player coach, but then he became just a coach, and then they sent him someplace to start his managing career. But his bat was so light. And Dave was talking about Jim Fuller's bat being this big monster. Joe's bat was like a feather, and he had that bottleneck at the end, no handle. And it was flame tempered. And when we used to come early, we would take the kids would take batting practice. I mean, we'd go out there and pitch and hit and everything else. And I used to grab his bat and I go out and hit with it. And he found out about it and he ended up giving me the bat. And but he was there. He could crush the ball. And the other guy on the other side of me was probably the iconic Red Wing, Luke Easter. And he was just the gentle giant. And at that point, he was probably, oh my gosh, I don't know, mid-50s, maybe even older. But Joe would bring his sons, Mike and Mark, to the ballpark, and they had the little Red Wing uniforms on. And Joe used to say to us, he said, "Okay, Robbie, take the boys out in the outfield for BP, but don't let any fly balls get near them. Make sure you're in front of them. Make sure you're in front of them." They were only like, I don't know, 7, 8 years old, maybe less. But we used to let them catch the grounders that would roll to a stop in front of them, But that was our job with those guys. And now years later, I'm friends with Mike and Mark, rest in peace. But with between Epstein and Joe Altobelli and Luke Easter, the only guy I think you were missing back then would have probably been Steve Bilko, because those guys could just absolutely crush the ball.
Talking about that, Dave, I remember when Jim Fuller came back to be inducted in the Wings Hall of Fame. He was playing professional softball at the time, and I think he hit a professional league. He was hitting like 850 or something, and hitting moonshots and things like that. Dave, let's talk a little bit about that 73 season. Like it came down to the wire, didn't it, as far as the pennant race and so forth for those Wings? Tell us how that played out, what you remember about that.
Well, the Red Wings going into the last weekend had a couple game lead over Pawtucket, and it came down to the last day, which would have been I think it could have been something like Labor Day weekend. They were knotted up, and that day it was a weird kind of day. It was, in a sense, 12,000 people were there. Place was packed. But before that game, for whatever reasons, they decided that the Red Wings, they had Don Cherry was there, and the Rochester Amerks were all there, and all their front office, and Cherry and his kid was out there. And You know, and it kind of took away from that day a little bit. And then the next thing is they had like a baseball Olympics. They had catchers throwing, both catchers from each team throwing the ball into a bucket. They had a wheelbarrow race where a player would put a guy in and reel him around. And then they had a home run hitting contest. And that was very cool because Jim Rice just got called up and was eligible for that. And, you know, they brought him up from AA, and he was already known as a stud out there. Everybody looked at him and, you know, everybody had a little bit of a history or story about this guy because he was the state champion in 100 and 200 yard dash in South Carolina as a high school kid. And then you're looking at him out there and he's like Adonis, the way he's built. And there wasn't anything you're looking at him that he couldn't do. But going into that game, in that home run hitting contest, I was out there shagging, and Rice hits a ball, and it looks like it's going over the fence. And, you know, especially to people from wherever they were, fans, anytime you hit a ball up in the air, it looks like it's going to be a home run. So I'm running back and I go, and it's definitely not going out. And I'm right against the fence, and I jump up just to make it look like, and I catch it. And the crowd thinks I stole the ball, you know, I robbed them from a home run. So everybody's looking at it, you know, maybe because the crowd, so they're looking at me, and Rice or people and all this are looking at me like, hey, that would have been a home run, or could it have been a home run? No, it wasn't even close. It was 2 feet short, but I jumped up making it look like, you know, because we had about an 8-foot fence out there. But, and that carried on a little later in the game. But but what ended up happening is the Red Wings won that game. That was wonderful. There was a wonderful celebration in the clubhouse. There was just so many things that went on. And even before that game was a little bit of a scene too. The Red Wings had been gifted by some fans, you know, like the season, you know, they had some fans that were really close, and they thought, you know, maybe here we are, we're going to give a gift or two, or cakes were there, all sorts of stuff were brought in, cupcakes, and somebody brought in a big panda, one of the monster stuffed animal pandas. Well, the Red Wings at the time, Kenny Kaiser, Rochesterian, they didn't like him. They didn't like him. So they took this panda and they hung it in the tunnel as you were coming out. It was visible in the tunnel, in the shadows. And Kaiser, when he was coming out with the balls, they hand him over to me. He looks and he sees the panda of him, and they put a Kaiser on its thing. And he went nuts. And he starts screaming. And I mean, people are probably going, what is it with this guy? Why is he's not even close to home plate. He's screaming and yelling at everybody. And they had to take that thing obviously down before the game could start. But it was a marvelous game. It was a great game. It was a historical day and just about maybe 10 years ago, a gentleman came up to me, a friend who got it from a family, says, hey, would you be interested in these Red Wing photos? I said, oh yeah, sure. Those were photos from that game. And also the events that were going on and the post celebration running off to the field. Priceless photos that I'll always cherish. And yeah, it was a great day for Red Wings and for me for sure. Memorable.
That's funny, Dave, because I'm sorry, but they won on the last day of the season.
Last day of the season, they won by 1. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Same here. We played Syracuse, and the winner won the International League. So both on the same last Labor Day weekend.
Well, yeah.
Pretty cool.
Great memories.
Max, it's interesting that game, like if I'm not mistaken, the Wings get off to they're romping. It's 10-2 or whatever. The fans are kind of celebrating early, and they're really, you know, they're like, every time Earl comes out there's tremendous ovations, this and that. And then little by little, Syracuse comes back, and all of a sudden it's a freaking game. And it comes down to a tremendous catch in center field.
Ray Younglow.
John Scruggs, was it?
Oh, Johnny Scruggs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Made a spectacular catch to end the rally and then won the pennant as a result.
Johnny Scruggs was what a great guy. He was never destined to be a great ball player, but I don't think anybody worked harder than him. In fact, I can remember one time Johnny and Mark Belanger. They came to the ballpark early a lot of times for extra batting practice. And we had our pitching coach was Herm Starrett. And if he wasn't around, they would get me to throw BP to him and maybe hit 100 balls. And John, I saw John hit him off the top of the scoreboard in left center field. And of course, it was batting practice, and I was pitching. So, but I remember this one day we were out there, and this I gotta back up a little bit. We got a new ball player on the team named Freddie Bean, and he always wore number 1. And Dave, I don't know about you, but I had number 1 on my back. Did you?
I was 0.
Oh, okay, all right. I had 1, and now I guess they put BB on it or something. I don't know. But when he showed up on the team, he came late in the year. He wanted number 1, so the clubhouse boy Al Sweetler came to me and said, "You got to give up your uniform, and you got to take his number." And I didn't want to, but you have no choice. So I took his number, and they never changed it in the program. So in the program it says Freddie Bean number 26, and I'm wearing 26. Years later, they retired that number. And so this one day, Johnny Scruggs and Belanger showed up. I pitched batting practice to both of them. And they said, Robbie, you want to take a couple swings? Yeah, I'd love to, So I grabbed Joe Altobelli's bat, and John grooved some nice right in the wheelhouse. And by this time I was a little bit bigger. And I got lucky, I hit a few out. And I wish I could remember the general manager, but we got all done. We're picking up the stuff, and the general manager says, "Hey, bat boy, in my office, 10 minutes." And I thought I was in trouble, for being out on the field. And anyways, long story short, he was with 2 guys in suits, and they were scouts for the Orioles. And they seemed to like the way I swung the bat. They they made a little bit of an offer, but I was too young, and it never panned out. But that was probably the one day I'll never, ever forget. And I don't think Johnny Scruggs is around anymore. I don't think he's with us anymore. But yeah, he left me a great memory.
Yeah.
You mentioned, which is a great thing. I'd love to see this someday, the Oriole way. What else do you have from that season? Was there anything that a player or anybody else that gave you that you held on to that has special meaning to you, or when you look back?
You talking to me?
Dave.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, they knew that I played a lot, gave me a lot. They just, when we broke away, when the season ended, I was pretty close to quite a few of the guys. Enos Cabell, he covered up. He took care of me. I mean, I would come in early. He would ask, "Hey, like what Max? Hey, you available?" The guys worked with me. They really did. They gave me plenty of opportunities to do everything and anything. So when they were done with it, they would say, "Hey, here's a bat. I was up with the Orioles. Here's an Oriole cap. Here's some balls. You need a mitt. You need hats. What do you need?" And man, I was, I took everything. I would never say no to anything, but I got a lot of that stuff. I still have a very nice collection of Oriole Red Wing stuff. That's my passion. I'd love to have you guys over to see it someday. It's something that it's going to be, it means a lot to me. It means a lot to all of you guys. And it's something that's going to be passed on. It's history. And, each one of them players, if I ever ran into them, and I ran into Fuller, I played softball against him, Kiko Garcia, Doug Flynn, a couple other guys, Max may have too, I don't know. But you'd see him in there and, out on the road somewhere. And, it was nice to have a drink or a lunch with them afterwards and share memories, because when they heard we were from Rochester and, and who you may have been, it perked a lot of people up. So, but the memories are first and foremost above the equipment. That's for sure.
Max, anything special for you other than that ball signed by Epstein?
Yeah. that is special. Like I said, they won like in Dave's case, they won the pennant on the last day, and then we had the playoffs, and we got eliminated eventually. And but then we all came back. We were supposed to come back on this one day and clean out our lockers and everything. And I showed up, and Earl was in his office. His office was no bigger than maybe 2 bathtubs put together. And so I cleaned out my locker, and the other guys were, and I hear him say, hey, Robbie, come on in here, get in here. And he had a real gravelly voice. And so I went in, and I just figured, he's just going to say goodbye and all this stuff. And he goes, so you get your ring? I said, did I get my ring? And he said, yeah, your ring, your pennant ring. Well, they forgot to order one for me. They took a measurement, but they never ordered it. So he's behind this old wooden desk. He pulls out the drawer. He reaches in, and he pulls out this box. This isn't the original. The original is black, but he pulls this box out and he goes, here, and he just throws it to me. And in the box was a pennant ring.
Wow.
It was his.
Wow.
And yeah, he had his name taken off of it and mine put on. And he said, I don't wear rings. He says, besides, I could have a dozen rings for every finger on my hand. He said, I don't like rings. He goes, see if it fits, And of course, it was a little big then. Now,
that's great.
Now,
wow. Yeah.
And like I've been fortunate to win a few rings in my lifetime in softball. And if you can imagine, this is a professional AAA pennant ring, and this is compared to I don't know if you can see the difference in it. But this is a softball ring, and this is a professional.
Yeah.
But it's pretty cool. I love this more than anything. And the funny thing is, years later, playing in a softball tournament down in Virginia, and over 65, and we're playing a team from New Jersey, and there's a guy named Barra that's playing for him, and Larry Barra, and it was Yogi's son, and we became very good friends. We played against each other many times. And after one of the games, he goes, Max, come on over here. He went over to his car. He goes, I brought something to show you. And he pulls out his duffel bag, and he had it in a sandwich bag. He reaches in the sandwich bag, and he pulls out the 1963 Yankee World Series ring that was his dad's. I'll tell you what, it was maybe a touch bigger than this one, but not much, Yeah. So pretty cool.
That's great. That's great.
All right. Well, why don't we open it up for questions? Doc, should I just go through the chat here? I mean, some of these have been answered. Should I just go to that?
Yeah, go ahead. I think there's only 1 or 2 that hasn't been answered there. So.
Right. One here, Michael Faber has one here that he found a player who played on both the 66 and 73 Wings. One of his all-time favorites as a kid, Kurt Moten. Any recollections you guys have on Kurt Moten?
Sure. Yeah, he came. He was traded to the Red Wings in 73, I think for Bill Kilpatrick. It was a mid-season acquisition. And he came in and he was a great guy, fun guy. In fact, talking about rings, when we were in Pawtucket, we went, Ray Miller, myself, and him went to go have dinner. And, it was a little place where the Pawtucket players would go there after the game. And so it was a little hot spot, so to speak. And, the waitress would come over and go, and talk baseball and all that. And he gave me the ring and he says, here, you put the ring on. And so they're Ray Miller, they're going out, who are you, who are you, and who are you? And they go to me, they go, he's our bonus baby. He's already been this, he's that. And they go, now who are you? And Kurt says, he's Kurt Moulton. And look at his World Series ring. And so I showed a ring. And Kurt was he was a good guy, very good guy, very nice guy. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Max, any memories, Max, of Kurt?
Yeah. I think he was with the Wings before 66 too. I used to keep score. I'd listen to the radio and keep score of the game. And I'm sure he's in some of my scorebooks. I pulled out the team picture and he's not in this one. I don't know why. Johnny Scruggs is there. Yeah, he must have. I don't know what happened to Kurt when they took this picture, but he wasn't in here.
I assume you both have team photos with you guys in the team photo. I would hope, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, they're grails.
Now, Max, that season 66, in addition to winning the pennant, there were 2 no-hitters. I'm wondering if you witnessed these. Dave Vineyard and Tom Phoebus pitched no-hitters for the Wings in 66. Were you there for those games?
Tommy's. I think Dave's might have been on the road.
Okay.
2 completely different guys. Vineyard was a pretty big guy, and Tommy Phoebus was probably 5'7". And one of the neat things I remember with Tommy Phoebus was when the pitchers warmed up before the game, they didn't warm up in the bullpen. They warmed up near the dugout.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times I was the dummy. I would grab a bat and stand in the batter's box while he threw his his warm-up pitches. And he hit a curveball that I bailed out on so many times. I mean, that thing was coming right from my head. It just fell right off the table, right into the catcher's glove. And he'd be out there just laughing at me. I always thought he was just one of the greatest pitchers. Vineyard was kind of full of himself. He was, I don't know. I never really got to know him that well, but Tommy I did. And I'm trying to think about, Frank Britannia. He was incredible. He was crazy. He was 66. He was our hippie. He would come into the clubhouse with a goofy hat on, looked like he just came out of Appalachia. And one time Herm Starrett came in, who was like probably around, at that time almost 50. He had an ulcer. He had to drink milk. And Britannia came in with a package of Oreos. And he went to the fridge, grabbed the milk, drank the milk, ate the Oreos. And Starrett was going to kill him. Britannia was great, and he was a heck of a pitcher too. So.
Oh
Yeah.
Any other characters, Dave, that you recall that really were maybe a little odd?
There were a few, Sergio Robles was a catcher, and he was just brought over in, say, 72 from the Dodgers. And he was looking to get called up, obviously, but they had Echeverria, the Orioles, and Elrod Hendricks, and they were steady catchers, and they were a lefty righty combination, and they were good defensive catchers as well. Robles was okay defensively, but anytime anybody was going up, getting called up to go to the Orioles, Sergio would walk over to him and tell him, tell that effing Weaver, so you get the picture there, and the other one would have been Freddie. They called him Freddie Freeway Frazier because he played at Syracuse the year before. And he was on loan to the Red Wings, I guess, because of, it became very obvious that he wasn't a team player, not in the Yankee organization. So he would come in, and he knew that I was into the sporting news and what was going on with everything. And so he'd always ask, what's Horace Clarke doing? What did Horace Clarke do? I hope he went 0 for 4 and kicked the ball about 3 times, So that would be it. There was always somebody, there was always something going on. But yeah, those guys stand out, because here's another one too. Every day that we would be around, and this is in April, May, right up until June, what's his name? Robles would go, I say Frio, I say Frio, I say Frio, and then say some other expletives. But the thing of it was he couldn't warm up in this. He wasn't an Oriole. You could see it. He just wasn't. The pitchers would throw to him, but he just wasn't the Oriole way wasn't there. The I guess you would say calling a game, the confidence between the pitchers and him wasn't there. So future was dim for him in the Orioles.
Any really bizarre superstitions that you noticed among any of the players that you work with? Any guys have certain routines or whatever that were a little bit out there?
Earl Weaver used to come into the clubhouse before every game and say, this is the big one. Every single game from opening day on. And the last day he came in, our last game against Syracuse, and he says, this is the big one. And of course, they all got on his case. Cookie Rojas was a late addition to the team. Tiny little guy, catcher. I guess he was utility, could play anywhere. He grabs these 2 ash can covers that were in the tunnel between the clubhouse and the dugout. And he goes, boys, I'm leading you to the field. And he took these ash can covers, and we marched through that tunnel to the field, and he led the way. Of course, Weaver didn't want to have anything to do with it, But yeah. Yeah. Every game, Weaver would start it the same way. This is the big one, boys.
You mentioned superstition. I think I was the victim of one from an opposing player, and it was Juan Beniquez. Juan Beniquez, at the end of the season, ironically, had the lowest batting average to win a batting championship. I think it was only 298. And but he was he for whatever reasons he liked me, and so before the game, he would call me out of the dugout, Red Wing dugout, and summon me to go out there, and we would stand in front. I would be by home plate, and we would play catch and gradually go out and play. Oh God, it was a long toss, so we were stretching out about 200 to 225, 250 feet in front of everybody. And, it really helped me out, and it gave me confidence as a young man, a young player, because everybody's watching me, and I got to throw it and catch it, throw it, and lengthen it out and get it out there. But this went on for the whole year. And I always thought it was a little funny that, the way that everybody was kind of looking at me under Red Wing Dog, because I was a Red Wing bat boy. And then 2 seconds later, the national anthem was being played, and they're out there competing against him. And but nobody said anything for the Red Wings, and I thought that was pretty cool. The way I think they saw the way it was working itself out, and the way it what it was doing for me as well. I think there was more to the big picture. They saw something, and I thought that looking at it now, I look at it as more as an adult. At that time, I looked at it like, man, how are they looking at me? what are they thinking here? But that went on all the way up to that last playoff game, or that last game that they were going in there, on Labor Day weekend. And, he, at the end of that, when the game was over, he came up to me and, I was picking stuff up and doing things like that. And he called over and, in partial Spanish, David, thank you. And, so I felt like I was being, a lucky charm of sorts to him. So I always rooted for him, always. Plus he wore a Red Sox batting helmet. I thought that was pretty cool, that he had something like that on.
Any great pranks that were pulled? Hot foots, bugs and guys, spikes, atomic bomb and jock straps, anything like that you guys can recall from your seasons?
Boy, I know there were. I can't think any right now. I do remember though. I think when Dave was bat boy, you said Barnowski was he in the
Eddie,
second?
yeah,
Was
he was the assistant
office then?
GM. Eddie
Okay.
Barnowski was the assistant. Yeah.
Yeah, he won 17 games that year for us.
Mm.
Pretty sure. And great guy. And he worked at Goss Sporting Goods in the off season. But he would sit with the other pitchers and the players that weren't playing at the other end of the dugout near the tunnel. And they used to eat sunflower seeds and they'd chew tobacco and they'd spit. And it was a concrete floor of the dugout, and they would spit a perfect square in front of them. I mean, you had like 5 guys, and all they're doing is spitting and spitting seeds.
Yeah.
But you had to stay within the square.
Yeah.
And their object in 9 innings was to fill that square.
Yeah.
So I think we ran out of balls or something. I had to go back in the clubhouse and I walked through that square. And they all they yelled at me. One guy picked me up and put me up on the steps of the dugout. He goes, "You don't walk through the square." It's bad luck.
Yeah. I had one where Randy Stein, if you remember pitcher Randy Stein, Herbie Hudson, and then Paul Mitchell. Well, Randy Stein and Herb Hudson, they dipped. And so they wanted to get me on it. They wanted to see me get sick, undoubtedly. So they said, "Hey, you're gonna have to have some of this, and just try it. Just try a little of it." And I go, "No, I'm not gonna. No, I can't do that. No, I'm not gonna do that. No, can't do it." And so as the game went on, and I'd come back, and they said, "Come on, you got it." Well, as the game, they saw that I wasn't going to. So what they would do is what you were saying, Max, hitting them and spitting them on that concrete floor. By the end of the game, because I was sitting there walking by doing all this stuff, but my back of my legs were like, it looked like I was rusting. It was, I had so much, it was on my pants, it was just, and I didn't know really until I took off everything at the end of the game. And I'm looking and I go, what? And then it dawned on me, because these guys would sit there and I wonder why they were snickering at me, And yeah, that was one of them. Yeah.
They tried to get me to chew.
Yeah.
They gave me a chaw of it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it just burned, So I was going to show them, but I got salted peanuts, and I stuck about 7 peanuts in my jaw. So I was spitting the whole game with the peanuts in there. They probably do.
It's funny. Yeah.
All right. Well, we don't have any other questions here. I just want to thank both of you guys. These are wonderful behind-the-scenes stories that really kind of give us a feel for, the minor league experience and the Red Wings, 2 really, memorable Red Wings eras. You guys kind of span there and stuff with Earl and then, Alto and stuff. So I just want to thank both of you for taking part in this tonight.
Oh,
Thank you.
Fun. This is fun. A lot of
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dave and Max, for joining us. This was
Thank you for having us.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Joe and Doc and Scott. Thank you.
Got all of you guys. Take care. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. We'll be in touch when we get another session set up.
Very good. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.